All right, let's jump right into a topic that's been debated for, well, centuries, but feels more relevant than ever: parental discipline. Today, we're going to unpack one author's perspective that draws a pretty direct line from how kids are raised to some of the biggest problems we see in society.
You've probably heard this one, right? This single phrase kind of sets the stage for the whole conversation. For generations, it's been the starting point for a really fiery debate about what good parenting actually looks like. But the source material we're digging into today asks a much deeper question. And boom, there it is, the core claim. The paper we're looking at makes a really bold argument that a widespread lack of discipline is a root cause of massive issues like crime, drug abuse, and even teenage pregnancy. So our job here is to really unpack how the author builds that case, step by step.
Okay, so how are we going to do this? Let's break it down into four main parts. First up, we'll look at what the paper actually means by discipline, the case for it. Then we'll get into the psychology of how indiscipline can spread. After that, we're going to touch on a specific social element the author highlights, the single parent factor. And finally, we'll wrap up with the author's big conclusion. So first things first, what are we even talking about when this paper says discipline? The author argues it's not just about punishment at all, but something way more fundamental for a kid's development. What's so key about this definition is that it frames discipline as a building process. See, according to this source, it's the whole framework that teaches kids self-control, responsibility, and accountability. It's about giving them the structure and clear consequences they need to grow emotionally and psychologically. Okay, so if discipline is so crucial, how does the opposite happen? How does a lack of it become a pattern? Well, the paper points to a really well-known psychological principle to explain how this can happen, a lot of times without parents even realizing it. And that principle is the law of reinforcement. Let's just walk through it. So, a child acts out, does something they shouldn't. Then, for whatever reason, the parent doesn't give them a negative consequence. And here's the absolute key. That inaction accidentally reinforces the bad behavior. It basically teaches the child that there are no repercussions. So what happens next? Of course, the behavior is way more likely to happen again. It's pretty easy to see how that could spiral, right? But you might be wondering, how does a parent's approach change so slowly that they just don't see the danger that's building? To explain this, the author uses a very, very powerful analogy. I'm sure you've heard of the frog in the boiling water. The author sets up two scenarios. In the first pot, the water is already boiling. In the second pot, the water starts out cool and is heated up very, very slowly. Now, in that first pot, the danger is obvious. It's immediate. The frog feels that extreme heat and instantly jumps out to save itself. This represents a big, sudden change that anyone would react to, right? But it's the second pot that really hits the author's point home. Because the temperature change is so gradual, the frog just doesn't perceive the threat. It keeps adapting and adapting until it's too late. The author argues this is exactly how permissive parenting can take hold, through these tiny, incremental changes that nobody really notices until things have reached a crisis point. Okay, this next part is where the paper moves on to its most specific and, yeah, maybe its most controversial factor linked to a lack of discipline. So it's really important to be clear here. What follows are the specific arguments and correlations presented within this particular source material we are examining. So the paper specifically zeroes in on single motherhood. The author suggests a few reasons for this. The argument is that single mothers might feel guilty about the situation and then overcompensate by being too permissive. The paper also argues that they might just struggle to single-handedly provide the structure and enforce the accountability that a two-parent household might find a little easier to manage. It's a complex point for sure, but it is central to this author's social diagnosis. So, after laying out this whole argument, from the definition of discipline to the psychological mechanisms and the social factors, where does this all leave us? Let's take a look at the author's final conclusion. Ultimately, the paper's main takeaway is a call to action. The author is really asserting that for society to fix these major problems, it first has to change its culture to recognize and revalue the importance of discipline in raising kids. From this author's point of view, it's not just a parenting choice, it's a societal imperative. And this brings us to a question that sits right at the heart of this entire debate. It's one this source material really forces us to confront, and it's the one we'll leave with you to think about. In the really complex world of modern parenting, where exactly do we draw that line between being supportive and being permissive?